Assalamu alaikum. We were looking at the provisions of the Electronic Transactions Ordinance in our previous lecture, and in our today's lecture we shall continue with that. And I presume that by now you have become half lawyers. The idea was just to familiarize you with the terminology that the lawmakers use so that you have some sense what a provision of law is and how can it be interpreted. If you recall, I told that there is a body called Certification Council which has been established by the federal government, and it has a very fundamental role in relation to the Electronic Transactions Ordinance. Basically, the Certification Council has to ensure that all the accredited certification service providers, they comply with the provisions of this ordinance. So they act in a fashion which is not in conflict with the terms of this law. Secondly, it also issues, grants, renews, suspends or revokes the accredited certificates issued in favor of the certification service providers. I told you the certification service providers, they are the same as the concept you are familiar with, the certification authorities. So they have just changed the name certification authority to certification service provider in this law. Thirdly, the Certification Council is also responsible for establishing a repository where the accredited certificates as well as digital certificates issued by the certification authorities would be placed or stored. That would be a public site where anybody can have access and see as to what are the accredited certificates issued so far, what are the different digital certificates issued. I hope that by now you have the distinction in mind as regards the accredited certificates and the digital certificates. So I repeat, in case of accredited certificates, you can have the notion that these are just like licenses which are issued by the council to reputed certification authorities or service providers, whereby they get the authority in law to be recognized as certification service providers in Pakistan. On the other hand, the digital certificates, you are familiar, these are those certificates which are issued by the certification service providers or certification authorities, and they authenticate or verify the public key of a particular user. And the certificates are used for the verification of the digital signatures. In order to obtain the accredited certificate, a certification service provider must apply to the Certification Council according to a prescribed form. So there is a provision, section 24 in the Electronic Transactions Ordinance, which say that any certification authority desirous of operating in Pakistan as accredited certification authority would apply to the Certification Council, and there would be certain regulations which would be framed by the Certification Council prescribing the procedure through which the application for accreditation certificates can be made. There would be certain fee which would be prescribed for the application, and then after the investigation, the verification, the council can then grant the accredited certificate to the certification service provider in the sense that it can now operate in Pakistan as a recognized certification service provider. Then I talked about the term certificate practice statement, if you recall. Certificate practice statement, in fact, is a policy document which would be required by certification provider. It should issue its certification practice statement, which would indicate that what are the different policies of the certification authority as regards the issuance of digital certificates, their suspension, their revocation, what would be the fee that it would charge from its clients, from its users for the issuance of the digital certificates, things like that. So whenever a certification service provider applies for the accredited certificate, it would also accompany its certificate practice statement along with the application. After reviewing all this documentation, then the Certification Council can approve the certification service provider, and in case there are any changes, any amendments to be made in the certification practice statement later on, then again there is a procedure which has to be prescribed through the regulations by the Certification Council, so that any such amendments or modifications can take place in the certificate practice statement. Then Section 25 of the ETO also says that there would be regulations in place prepared by the Certification Council which would outline the procedure for the suspension, revocation or cancellation of any accredited certificate. So that is the main feature as regards the issuance of the accredited certificates as well as the preparation of certificate practice statements. So let's have a look at the relevant provisions. You can see on the screen Section 24, subsection 1, the Certification Council may grant accreditation to certification service provider, its cryptography services, electronic signature or advanced electronic signature and security procedures who complies with the criteria for accreditation specified in the regulations. Subsection 2 says the terms and conditions of the accreditation, including those relating to duration of the accreditation, renewal, suspension or revocation, shall be specified in regulation. So you know all this procedure that will have to be outlined through the regulations framed by the Certification Council under this provision. Subsection 3 says the fee for grant and renewal of the accreditation shall be as prescribed. Again, that will have to be prescribed through the regulations. 4. The form and manner of proceedings for the consideration of application for grant, renewal, suspension or revocation of accreditation shall be specified in the regulations, provided that the regulations shall provide for a transparent procedure with due regard to the right of hearing. So whenever the application for the grant of accreditation certificate would be considered by the council, it will give a proper hearing to the party which is applying for such a certificate. I should point out here a very basic, a very fundamental principle of law, which is that nobody should be condemned unheard. That is also called the principle of natural justice in law, which means that whenever you are going to pass an order, whenever you are going to make a decision, that decision should be transparent, should be fair, in the sense that before making such decision, a proper hearing should be granted to the party which is being affected by that decision. So here again, while deciding the application, a proper right of hearing would be ensured to the certification provider. Section 25 of the ETO provides, number 1, each certification service provider desirous of being accredited shall prepare and have at all times accessible a certification practice statement in such form and with such details, particulars, and contents as may be specified in regulations made by the Certification Council. Again, there has to be regulations in place which would outline the procedure for the submission of practice statements. Subsection 2 states, without prejudice to the generality of the foregoing. Again, it's a very typical language of the lawmakers, which means that without affecting the general provision, the general sense which is conveyed through subsection 1 above, the specific regulations should provide as follows. A. Prompt information to persons likely to be adversely affected by an event relating to the information system of the certification service provider, or inaccuracy, invalidity, or misrepresentation contained in a certificate. This means that the certification practice statement should specify as to what are the rights available to an affected person in case some wrong or inaccurate information is contained in a certificate whereby that person is adversely affected. B. Identification of subscribers. C. Suspension or revocation of certificates. So there would be detailed specification what would happen in case a digital certificate is suspended or revoked. D. Accuracy of information contained in a valid accreditation certificate. E. Foreseeability of reliance on valid accreditation certificates. And F. Deposit of certificates or notification of any suspension or revocation of any accreditation certificate or any other fact or circumstance affecting the certificate in the repository. Again, I would repeat here that you are not required to memorize these provisions of law. They are just to convey a general sense to you. So as regards your examination, you are just supposed to gather a basic sense and then you have to make an understanding based on that. Okay, then there is a provision in the ETO which says that the Certification Council can establish any regional offices anywhere in Pakistan. It can hire different individuals. It can have its own staff. And then there is a provision which says that whenever a matter for decision comes before the Certification Council, it must try to decide that expeditiously, as quickly as possible, and within a period of 90 days. Plus, there is also a condition that the order or the decision made by the Certification Council should be a speaking order. Now, there is again a legal terminology used here. Speaking order means a reasoned order. It should not be a mechanical order. So there should be specific, clear reasons contained in the order which a Certification Council would pass in response to an application. If it's a mechanical order, if it is not a reasoned order, then it cannot be considered a proper order in the eyes of law. Then there are two provisions in the ETO which have caused amendment in certain laws. For example, there is a law in Pakistan Telecommunication Reorganization Act 1996. This law had introduced a ban in the use of cryptography earlier on. By virtue of Electronic Transactions Ordinance, that ban has now been lifted. So the use of cryptography, the use of public, private keys, digital signatures, etc., that has now been allowed in Pakistan because of that provision in the ETO. Secondly, our main law of evidence, that is the Qanun-e Shahadat Order 1984, that has also been considerably amended by a provision in the ETO, and the idea was that the Qanun-e-Shahadat order should be so amended that it provides proper legal recognition to documents in electronic form and to electronic signatures, which is the main purpose of the ETO. So the idea was that any documents in electronic form, they should have the same evidentiary value as the paper documents carry in the eyes of law. Okay, then there is a section in the ETO which says that ETO would not be applicable to certain documents. Okay, so where the general scope of the ETO is that it provides legal recognition to documents in electronic form, there is a provision which creates an exception to this general principle, and mainly there are 5 such documents or exceptions listed in a section in the ETO which say that this law, this ordinance would not be applicable on such documents. What are these documents? Number 1, any negotiable instruments, they are still required to be in paper form. Number 2, power of attorneys, they must be in paper form. ETO would not apply to such documents ordinarily. Number 3, any testamentary documents, say any will, that would again be required to be in paper form. Number 4, any trust deed whereby a trust is created, that should be in paper form. And number 5, any contract which deals with the transfer of any immovable property, say any land, or any conveyance deed. Any conveyance means any alienation, any transfer through a proper legal document, that is called conveyance. So any contract of sale or any conveyance in relation to immovable property, again such documents are not supposed to be in the electronic form. ETO would not apply to any such documents. And then there is also a provision, a subsection, which says that the federal government would be empowered to make any changes in this provision. So in case the federal government decides that, well, such documents, they can be now in electronic form, ETO can apply on such documents, then the federal government has got the power under this law to make any such arrangement, to make any such decision. So let's see what is the provision in this regard. First of all, let's see what section 26 of the ETO says. All applications and matters coming before the Certification Council shall be decided through a speaking order. As I was mentioning, speaking order means a reasoned order. As expeditiously means as quickly as possible, but not later than 90 days, except in extraordinary circumstances and for reasons to be recorded. Then 27 states, subsection 1, the Certification Council may appoint such officers, employees, and advisors as it may consider necessary for the efficient performance of its functions on such terms and conditions as it may prescribe by regulations. 2. The Certification Council may establish regional or local offices as may be necessary for efficient performance of its functions. And then section 31, which I was mentioning, which creates an exception as regards certain documents which are still required to be in paper form. Subsection 1 says, subject to subsection 2, nothing in this ordinance shall apply to. Now this statement, subject to subsection 2, means that all whatever is contained in subsection 1 would be conditional upon the provision contained in subsection 2, which means that in case federal government decides otherwise, then the decision of the federal government would prevail. If it does not make any decision in this regard, then okay, subsection would as it is apply. Clause A says a negotiable instrument as defined in section 13 of the Negotiable Instrument Act 1881, that has to be in paper form. B, a power of attorney under the Powers of Attorney Act 1881. C, a trust as defined in the Trust Act 1882 but excluding constructive, implied and resulting trusts. D, a will or any form of testamentary disposition under any law for the time being in force. And E, a contract for sale or conveyance of immovable property or any interest in such property. So these are mainly 5 different types of documents which are listed in this subsection. I'll just shortly explain what these documents actually mean legally. Subsection 2 says the federal government, after consultation with the provinces, may, by notification in the official gazette and subject to such conditions and limitations as may be specified therein, declare that the whole or part of this ordinance shall apply to the whole or part of one or more instruments specified in clauses A to E of subsection 1. So that is the exception. If the federal government want, it can require that such documents can be in electronic form. It can override the provisions of subsection 1. The question is, what is a negotiable instrument? In fact, that is a type of document which is defined in Negotiable Instruments Act 1881, that is a law in Pakistan. So a promissory note, bill of exchange or a check, they fall under the definition of the term negotiable instrument. Then what is a promissory note? Promissory note is a document which indicate a promise to pay. So in case on a piece of paper I write that I owe ₹1,000 to Mr. A and I will pay this amount on such and such date, then that is an unconditional undertaking by me, a promise by me that I owe this much amount to such person and I would make this payment by such and such time. So that piece of paper, that document can be termed as a promissory note or a negotiable instrument. Okay. In case there is a negotiable instrument, in case there is a promissory note which is executed, then it has to be in the paper form ordinarily unless the federal government otherwise specify. Secondly, bill of exchange again is a type of negotiable instrument. In a bill of exchange, there are 3 parties. I mean, there is a payer who has to make certain payment to a person who's a payee, and then there is a party to whom the order for payment is made, right? For example, check is an example of a bill of exchange. You write a check and you sign that check, you hand it over to someone you want to make payment to. Now, this check is in fact an order to a financial institution, to a bank, that, well, this much amount should be paid to this person who carries this check. So we can say it's a type of a bill of exchange. So a promissory note, a bill of exchange, a check, they have to be in the paper form. Then the other types of documents listed in this provision are power of attorneys. Power of attorney is a document whereby some authority is given to a specific person to perform certain functions on behalf of the person who executes or signs that power of attorney. For example, if I want to go abroad and I prepare a document, a power of attorney, in which I authorize my brother, Mr. A, to sign certain documents on my behalf in my absence, then by virtue of that document called power of attorney, whatever things that person, my brother, would do on my behalf, they would bind me, right? So any such document, a power of attorney, has to be in the paper form ordinarily. Then any testamentary documents like wills. So before a person's death, if a person signs a document in which he clearly says that, well, after my death, my property would devolve upon such and such person, that document can be termed as a will, and a will has to be in paper form. Another type of document mentioned in this provision is a trust deed. So you should have some idea what a trust is. Say, I have a piece of land, and I want to create a trust, a public trust for, say, mentally retarded children. I can alienate my land to that trust through a document called trust deed. So the benefit of that land would now be available to that trust. I would be called as the author of trust, and the children, mentally retarded children, would be called the beneficiaries of the trust. And the document through which this trust is created is called the trust deed. I can also appoint certain persons as the trustees. Trustees are those individuals who would manage the affairs of this trust. They would run the trust. So that is the concept behind a trust, and we have a Trust Act 1882, the law in relation thereto in Pakistan. So a trust deed also has to be in paper form. Then the fifth type of documents listed in this provision, they relate to the conveyance deeds or any contracts which deal with the sale of the immovable property. Okay, so if I have a piece of land, an immovable property, and I want to sell this property to, say, Mr. A, and I enter into a contract with Mr. A as regard the sale of this land, then that contract has to be in paper form. It cannot be in electronic form because of this exception. Similarly, in case I want to pass on a title, a legal title in relation to my immovable property to someone, I can create a conveyance deed, a sale deed for that matter, and then that sale deed or conveyance deed again has to be in paper form. Okay, notice that by virtue of subsection 2, the federal government still has got the power. It can bring all such documents within the ambit of the Electronic Transactions Ordinance if it decides so, but ordinarily there is a clear-cut exception which has been created by virtue of subsection 1 of this provision. Okay, then there is one provision in the ETO which specifies that all such matters which relate to any persons in Pakistan, any events occurring in Pakistan, or any information systems placed in Pakistan, then the courts in Pakistan, they will have the jurisdiction in relation to all such matters which are covered by this ordinance. Okay, what is meant by jurisdiction, by the way? Again, it's a legal term which means that the authority, the power, the competence of a court to decide a matter, right? So if I say that this court does not have jurisdiction, that means that this court is not legally competent or entitled or empowered to entertain or decide a dispute. The law clearly enshrines, it provides the authority upon a particular court to entertain and decide a matter, and that is called the jurisdiction of that court. So there is a provision in the ETO which clearly says that the matters which are covered by this ordinance they can be decided by the courts in Pakistan. The Pakistani courts will have jurisdiction provided that such matters, they pertain to any events, any persons or any information systems in Pakistan. Then there is again a very important section in the ETO which says that this law would have an overriding effect on any other law in Pakistan. Okay? This means that this law will have a dominating effect, an overriding effect on any other law in Pakistan which is in conflict with this law or which is inconsistent with this law. Right? So there is a provision, say, in some other law in Pakistan which is contrary to this law, then this law will prevail. It would dominate, and that provision would not be enforced. Okay, so let's have a look at the provisions in this connection. I've already explained the concept, but it would be a good idea to just look at these provisions. Section 32 of the ETO, the provisions of this ordinance shall apply notwithstanding, you are familiar with this term, I've already explained it, notwithstanding the matters being the subject hereof occurring outside Pakistan, insofar as they are directly or indirectly connected to or have an effect on or bearing in relation to persons, information systems or events within the territorial jurisdiction of Pakistan. Section 33 is, the provisions of this ordinance shall apply notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in any other law for the time being in force. I've already explained that. You may find this jargon, this language to be a little ticklish or complex, but you're not required to memorize this, just have a basic sense. Okay, then ETO also outlines 4 different types of offenses. Remember, there are only 4 different types of offenses which are mentioned in the ETO and none other. Okay, what are these offenses? First of all, there is a provision in the ETO which states that in case any subscriber of a certificate, any person who requests for the issuance of a digital certificate to the certification authority, if he provides a wrong, false or misleading information to the certification service provider in order to obtain the digital certificate, then that would be treated as an offense under the ETO. Okay. Similarly, if that person does not inform the concerned certification authority about any changes in the particulars or about any new information, subsequent information in due time in relation to the digital certificate, again that would be an offense, and there is the punishment provided in this section of the ETO which says that such a person can be imprisoned for a term up to 7 years, and he can also be fined up to 10 million rupees. And both these punishments, the fine and the imprisonment, can also be given to him simultaneously. There is a provision again in the ETO which deals with the certification authorities, and according to that, in case a certification service provider knows that the certificate it has issued is false, is wrong, is misleading, and it does not revoke or cancel such a certificate, then in such an eventuality, the directors of that certification authority, the responsible officers of that certification authority, they would be held liable. And there is a punishment provided again for that, 7 years imprisonment and a fine up to 10 million rupees. Let's see what are the details of these two provisions. You can look at this slide. Section 34 is the relevant provision. Subsection 1 starts, any subscriber who A, provides information to a certification service provider knowing such information to be false or not believing it to be correct to the best of his knowledge and belief. B, fails to bring promptly to the knowledge of the certification service provider any change in circumstances as a consequence whereof any information contained in a certificate accepted by the subscriber or authorized by him for publication or reliance by any person ceases to be accurate or becomes misleading. Or C, knowingly causes or allows a certificate or his electronic signatures to be used in any fraudulent or unlawful manner shall be guilty of an offense under this ordinance. Subsection 2 states, the offense under subsection 1 shall be punishable with imprisonment, either description of a term not exceeding 7 years, or with fine which may extend to 10 million rupees, or with both. And section 35 is, every director, secretary and other responsible officer by whatever designation called connected with the management of the affairs of a certification service provider which A, issues, publishes or acknowledges a certificate containing false or misleading information. B, fails to revoke or suspend a certificate after acquiring knowledge that any information contained therein has become false or misleading. C, fails to revoke or suspend a certificate in circumstances where it ought reasonably to have been known that any information contained in the certificate is false or misleading. D, issues a certificate as accredited certification service provider while its accreditation is suspended or revoked shall be guilty of an offense under this ordinance. And subsection 2 is, the offense under subsection 1 shall be punishable with imprisonment, either description of a term not exceeding 7 years, or with fine which may extend to 10 million rupees, or with both. 3, the certification service provider or its employees specified in subsection 1 shall also be liable upon conviction to pay compensation for any foreseeable damage suffered by any person or subscriber as a direct consequence of any of the events specified in clauses A to D of subsection 1, and 4, the compensation mentioned in subsection 3 shall be recoverable as areas of land revenue. I don't want to explain this areas of land revenue. I think this is sufficient for you to know the amount of knowledge you have gained. There are 2 more offences listed in the ETO. Section 36 of the ETO provides that in case any person gains or even attempts to gain access to any information system with or without any intention of acquiring information or knowledge contained therein, and that person does not have the authority, the authorization from the person whose information system that is, then that person who has gained such unauthorized access would be guilty of an offense. And there is a punishment provided for that. Again, imprisonment up to 7 years and a fine up to 1 million rupees, or both. The idea behind introducing this section was to protect one's informational privacy rights. So in case some person who is not authorized, he tries to gain access to an information system to get such information, then that person should be held as responsible. He should be held as guilty of an offense. Then there is another provision, section 37 in the ETO, which provides that in case a person, after having got the access to an information system, if he alters, deletes, modifies or removes any information contained therein, then that person would be held as responsible for the commission of another offense, and the punishment provided for that is imprisonment up to a term 7 years and fine up to 1 million rupees or both. But the point is that that person should do these things unauthorizedly. So if that person was not authorized to delete, remove, etc., any information, only then he can be held responsible. If he has got the authority by the person whose information system that is, then there is no question of any offense. So let's see what are these two provisions. Section 36 provides any person who gains or attempts to gain access to any information system with or without intent to acquire the information contained therein, or to gain knowledge of such information, whether or not he is aware of the nature or contents of such information, when he is not authorized to gain access as aforesaid, shall be guilty of an offense under this ordinance, punishable with either description of a term not exceeding 7 years, or fine which may extend to 1 million rupees, or with both. Section 37 says, 1. Any person who does or attempts to do any act with intent to alter, modify, delete, remove, generate, transmit, or store any information through or in any information system, knowingly that he is not authorized to do any of the foregoing, shall be guilty of an offense under this ordinance. 2. Any person who does or attempts to do any act with intent to impair the operation of, or prevent or hinder access to any information contained in any information system, knowingly that he is not authorized to do any of the foregoing, shall be guilty of an offense under this ordinance. 3. The offenses under subsection 1 and 2 of this section will be punishable with either description of a term not exceeding 7 years, or fine which may extend to 1 million rupees, or with both. So just in case there is a person sitting in England and he accesses an information system placed in Pakistan, and he deletes some information contained in such an information system without having any authority to do so, then by virtue of this provision contained in the ETO, that person would be said to have committed an offense. And remember, I told you there is a provision in the ETO which says that courts in Pakistan can have jurisdiction in such matters which are connected to the ETO, where such matters relate to any persons, information systems or events occurring in Pakistan. Well, experts believe that these two provisions, section 36 and 37, they are very broadly, very openly worded. So ideally there should be full-fledged data protection and privacy laws in place of just having these two provisions, right? So you may have noticed that in case somebody accidentally accesses an information system and he is able to view some information without having the authority as such, then by virtue of section 36, maybe he can be held responsible, although he did not have any intention of doing anything wrong. So therefore the need is that these two provisions, they should be properly, either they should be properly worded or there should be full-fledged data protection and privacy laws in place. Okay, dear students, in our today's lecture, we have basically reviewed quite a few things. We have seen that what is the provision as regards the issuance of certificate practice statements, what is the role of Certification Council in this regard, how does the Certification Council function, what type of data is maintained in the repository arranged by the Certification Council. Then we have also seen as to what are the different types of documents which create an exception to the applicability of ETO. So mainly I told you there are 5 such documents listed, and I have elaborated that they ordinarily are not supposed to be in electronic form unless the federal government makes a decision to the contrary. Then we have also seen as to what is the concept of jurisdiction, and I told you that in case there are certain matters which relate to events, persons, information systems in place in Pakistan, then the courts in Pakistan can have jurisdiction in relation to all such matters connected to the ordinance. We have also seen the 4 different types of offences which are outlined in the ETO, and there is no 5th offence. These are the 4 offences which are only mentioned in the ETO. So one offence is that where a subscriber provides a wrong information to the certification authority in order to obtain a digital certificate, then that subscriber would be considered as an offender and he can be punished. There is punishment provided for that. Secondly, in case a certification authority, knowingly that the certificate it has issued as false, contains wrong information, or knowing that the information contained in the certificate has subsequently become false, then in that eventuality again the directors or the responsible officers of the certification authority can be held liable. Then the third type of offense is that where unauthorizedly somebody accesses an information system and tries to gain the information contained in such information system, then if that person does not have the authority, can be considered as an offender. And the 4th type of offense is where a person, after accessing an information system, does something more. He deletes information, he alters, modifies or removes some information. Then if that person does not have the authority to do so, then that person would be guilty of an offense. Again, there is punishment provided for that, both the imprisonment as well as fine. The courts which are competent to decide any such complaints connected with these offences, they are the courts of session. Okay, so the jurisdiction vested in case of these offences is with the session courts. Okay, you can straight away file a complaint before the session court, and then the session court will have the jurisdiction to decide such a matter, such a complaint. In our subsequent lecture, I would like to highlight as regards what are the different types of courts in Pakistan. It can be useful for us to know some information, to have some knowledge. What are the different types of courts and how is the hierarchy of courts function. But for the time being, I have to say Allah Hafiz to you. I have to conclude my lecture. In a subsequent lecture, we shall deal with some of the topics that are left in relation to ETU, and then we'll move on to discuss the global legal issues. Remember, we talked about that, the issue of territorial jurisdiction, online defamation, copyright, trademark, domain name conflicts. These are some very interesting issues, and at some length we would like to discuss them. So until then, Allah Hafiz.